the security state of the USA and Britain oppressing people's freedom, civil liberties and human rights, all a consequence of Bush's war on terror in 2001. The vote on Thursday night was a bit of a change to something more rational and more peaceful in the future. But it's not our job to stop here, it's our job to redouble our efforts for peace and for non-Western intervention. We're going to have a rally this afternoon with a number of people who are speaking, and we hope to finish the rally around 3 o'clock. Because it's such a lovely day, you can then enjoy a well-deserved cup of coffee or something afterwards. Can I ask you to give a very warm welcome to our first speaker, who was there at the beginning, who helped to found the Stop the War Coalition, and has been a brilliant worker and advocate for peace ever since. Please give a warm welcome to Lindsay Drummond.
Today, not just for lobbying and demonstrating this week as so many of us have done, but thank you for everything that everybody has done over these past 12 years to oppose the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and Libya. Because we should be clear what happened on Thursday night. This was a victory. It was a victory in Parliament. It was the vote that the politicians should have had the guts to hold 10 years ago, and they didn't. And it was the result of every bit of anti-war campaigning that ourselves and millions of other people have done. Every argument that we put has turned out to be true, and everything the warmongers said has turned out to be lies. We have had 3 major interventions in 12 years, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya. Every single one we were told they would save lives. Every single one of them has cost lives, has made refugees, has made the country less stable. And that is why millions of people around the world do not believe them when they say they're doing this to save the lives of people in Syria. It is not about that, it is about getting control of the region, and that is what all of the wars have been about. And we've done something very historic this week. We've said for some years that one of our aims as a movement should be to break Britain from following the US in every step of its foreign policy. This week we made that possible, and you can see that David Cameron, you can see what a weak and unpleasant Prime Minister he is, but he has been defeated, and he can be defeated again. And we don't just want to defeat him over these wars. I'm fed up with the scapegoating and racism and Islamophobia that has gone on as a result of these wars. To say now, I'm absolutely fed up with the view of this vote that somehow it's about that we don't care about people in the Middle East, or we're isolationists and we only care about what happens in Britain. People in this country feel very, very strongly about what is happening to people in the world. We hate seeing people dying in wars. We hate seeing the 2 million refugees that we now see in Syria. But let's remember, that wasn't the worst humanitarian disaster of this century, as William Hague told us. The worst humanitarian disaster of this century was the Iraq War, which had 1 million dead and 4 million refugees. But we're not here to say we want to cut ourselves off from people elsewhere in the world. I believe in international cooperation. I don't believe in Little Englandism. I don't believe that UKIP should be welcome at this demonstration with their terrible racism and anti-immigration stance. Stop the War is about something very different. It's against Islamophobia, it's against dividing people on the ground of nations, and it's about creating peace and justice. And David Cameron has now received a serious blow. I think we should continue to campaign against Barack Obama and his attempt to take this war further. Tony Blair's the envoy for peace in the Middle East, and Barack Obama has the Nobel Peace Prize. What kind of priorities give these two warmongers the right to be regarded as pacifists? We need to campaign against Obama, and we will be at the American Embassy on Tuesday night. Please come and join us. But it's also about saying what kind of priorities. We do not have the money for housing and education and health. We're cutting people's benefits for some of the poorest people in this country, but suddenly we have money for yet another intervention. So let's say we're against Cameron wars, we're against his austerity as well, and we want to fight for a fairer system, a more equal system, and a system where we end wars, inequality and poverty. And this is what the movement should now move on to do. On the 29th of September, we'll all be going to Manchester to demonstrate outside the Tory Party conference, and we will be back here. We'll be back here demonstrating against Obama, against the further attacks, against the possibility of more wars in the Middle East. So thank you all again for everything that you've done. Keep campaigning, keep struggling, and never let anybody say that demonstrating doesn't work. Our demonstrations have worked. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Lindsay. Today the eyes of the world are on London, and today you thousands will inspire the people of the world as we inspired them on February the 15th. We have broken the bloody chains that bind us to the United States. We will no longer pay the blood price for our alliance with that country. And we have also defeated the warmongering government of David Cameron. Please welcome our next speaker. Andrew Murray was chair of the Stop the War Coalition for a decade. Now he's here representing Unite the Union, one of the foremost anti-war trade unions. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you very much indeed, Kate. Today is, of course, a day of victory, but we must start with a sobering note that despite the historic events on Thursday, war is still imminent, and while the huge political impact of the MP's decision will reverberate, the military situation remains alarming. Our first message today has to be to President Obama, and it is this. If the case for war cannot be approved by a British Parliament that has approved every case for war for the last 200 years, then there is no case for war. Yes, we want an end to the civil war in Syria. Yes, we mourn the deaths of all of those, whether they have been killed by chemical or conventional munitions. But we also know that the only solution in Syria is a political one, that it must come from the Syrian people, that it would be helped by an end to all forms of outside interference, and that President Obama must recognise there is not a single problem in the Middle East, as history shows, that cannot be made worse by Anglo-American military bombardment. So President Obama, London calling, stop the war. Of course, our next message has to be to our own political elite. Yes, this has been a defeat for David Cameron, but it has been more than that. It's been a defeat for all of those in a bipartisan, sometimes tripartisan elite who have backed the recent wars of this century. The best reason David Cameron could come up with for saying we should bomb Syria was we cannot stand. Well, we did not stand aside in Afghanistan. Instead, we have killed thousands of Afghans and sent our own soldiers to die for a corrupt, despotic regime. We did not stand aside in Iraq. We killed 1 million people and wrecked a nation for a generation. We did not stand aside in Libya.
instead we have wandered our country into sectarian and ethnic chaos. It is past time that we stood aside. It is past time that imperialism stood aside and allowed the people of the Middle East to make their own future free from the threat of war and bombardment. And on the subject of standing aside, perhaps it's time David Cameron looked in the mirror and stood aside himself. But it's not just David Cameron, it's not just the Tories. We've just had Lord Ashton. The Lord Ashton, for whom internationalism means war. The Lord Ashton, who is forever preening himself in a colonial governor's uniform. He has said he's never been so ashamed of his country. Well, let me say to you, Lord Ashton, your country has never been so ashamed of the Liberal Democrats who devoted for war on Thursday and the decade. And also, I know it's
because in London, it's very different to the rest of
we should not forget to mention the grotesquely misnamed Middle East peace envoy, whose answer to every issue in the Middle East is war, who has been bobbing around on an oligarch's yacht in the Mediterranean this last week, urging war again against Syria. We have to say, Tony Blair, this week you have been consigned to the past. Next week you should be consigned to the Hague.
So this is why in London the community
My final point,
is very
brothers and
different.
sisters, is this.
Because
It has been said that Thursday's vote was a triumph for democracy.
So
And
they
it was,
like
in a
to
far more
get on
profound
with
way
it,
than
try
most
to
people
understand
think.
each other's culture.
It was not just
And I think it's very good in it. There's a lot of community building.
to MPs. It's about making Parliament accountable to the views of the people.
A lot of local.
That is democracy, and the seeds of Thursday's victory were sown long ago. They were sown when we assembled here 12 years ago, the first Stop the War Coalition rally, to warn against the dangers of an attack on Afghanistan. They were sown in March 2003, February 2003,
But
when
in London
millions
as well,
marched against
you
the threat
find
of war in Iraq that were ignored by the government.
London.
Thursday's victory was not about MPs, certainly not about MPs alone.
In
It was
general,
about
I
all of
don't
us
understand.
who have marched and
Because,
demonstrated against the war on
people
terror
come
for the
here,
last
they don't
12
live here
years.
for long.
It has taken that long to make the MPs listen, but it is our victory.
For 2 years or 3 years.
It's a victory for all of those who oppose the war in
So
Iraq
they're
and
not
the
here for long.
occupation
They
of
come in
Iraq,
for
the
1 or 2
war
weeks,
against Libya,
study,
the occupation of
and then they
Afghanistan,
go.
for everyone who has warned
So
these wars will not make this country
there's
safer
not
from
very-
terrorism, quite the opposite. It is a victory for everyone who is protesting and has not been silent. So if anyone ever says to you, any of us lives, what good does marching and demonstrating and protesting do? Here is your answer. And for all of you who have marched and demonstrated over the last 12 years for peace, here is our vindication. And if anyone should ever ask you ever again, what war did stop the war stop, you can look them in the eye and say, this one. Thank you, Andrew. Listening to North Resident, giving it like it is, for peace and justice around the world. Last night, I was in North Wales at a wonderful festival, the Victor Jara Music Festival, to commemorate 40 years since the coup in Chile, the life of Victor Jara and the life of Salvador Allende. And they asked me to bring a greeting today to say solidarity, peace and justice, and for internationalism from the people there commemorating the loss of so many in Chile as an earlier example of US imperial intervention when they provoked a coup which killed Salvador Allende and 7,000 other people. The spirit lives on for peace and justice all around the world.